On a stretch of coast in the Bay of Naples, there is a wall that runs out into the sea. It is not much to look at, a low gray spine of rough stone, half drowned, furred with weed and barnacle, breaking the surface where the waves come in. Tourists walk past it without a glance, and yet that wall has been standing in the open Mediterranean, taking the full weight of the water on its face for 2,000 years. Think about what that means. The sea is the great destroyer. Salt water is the single most hostile place you can put a man-made structure. It works into every crack. It freezes and thaws. It hammers day and night, and above all, it corrodes. We build piers and harbor walls today out of the strongest concrete we know how to make, laced through with steel. And the sea eats them in 50 years. Go and look at a modern seawall that is only decades old, and you will find it crumbling, streaked with rust, spalling away in sheets, already dying. Now, go back to that gray Roman spine in the Bay of Naples. It was poured before the birth of Christ. It has never been repaired, and when scientists finally went out and drilled a core from the heart of it, they found something that should not have been possible. The concrete was not decaying. It was not even holding steady. Down there in the dark, under the salt and the pressure, it was still changing, still reacting, still growing new crystal inside itself, knitting tighter with every passing century. The sea that destroys our concrete had spent 2,000 years making theirs stronger. This is the history of Roman concrete. Not the emperors, not the legions. The gray, humble, unglamorous stuff they poured into the ground and into the water. A material they somehow made better than ours, then lost the recipe for, and that we are only now with electron microscopes beginning to understand. Start with the substance, because everything strange in this story grows out of it. The Romans called it opus caementicium, roughly, work made of rubble. And that name has caused 2,000 years of confusion, because the word caementa, the rubble, is where our word cement comes from. And yet the caementa were not the cement at all. They were the chunks, the fist-sized lumps of broken stone and brick and volcanic rock that made up the body of the mass. The real magic was in the paste that held those chunks together, and that paste was made of 3 things. The first was lime. You take limestone, you burn it in a kiln until it drives off its gas and turns to a caustic white powder, quicklime, and that lime, mixed with water, becomes the glue that mortar has used since the Stone Age. But plain lime mortar is weak, and worse, it will not set under water. It needs the air. Left wet, it stays soft forever. On its own, lime could never have built a harbor. So the Romans added the second thing, and it changed everything. They added a fine volcanic ash, a gray, gritty dust from the ground around the Bay of Naples. And when that particular ash met lime and water, a reaction began that ordinary sand cannot start. The ash was chemically hungry. It seized on the lime and grew a dense, interlocking web of new mineral compounds, binding the whole mass into something close to solid rock, a stone that would set hard even at the bottom of the sea. That was the secret. Not the rubble, not the lime alone, but the ash, volcanic earth mixed with burnt stone and water that turned a soft gray slurry into an artificial rock harder than the mountains it came from. That gray composite is what the Romans built their world out of, not the marble we photograph. The marble is only the skin underneath it, holding up the vaults of the baths, the foundations of the aqueducts, the tiers of the Colosseum, the breakwaters of the harbors, and the great dome of the Pantheon is this: ash, lime, water, and rubble. Concrete. Everything turned on the ash. And the ash came from one of the strangest landscapes in the ancient world. West of Naples lies a region the Romans called the Phlegraean Fields, the burning fields. It is not a single volcano, but the sunken caldera of an enormous one, a wide, restless bowl of ground where the earth still steams and hisses to this day. Sulfur bleeds from the rocks. The soil is warm. In places, the ground itself breathes. To the Romans, this was a haunted, sacred, half-infernal place, a doorway, some said, to the underworld. And it was here, around the town of Puteoli, modern Pozzuoli, that they found the gray dust that made the best concrete on earth. They named it after the town, Pulvis Puteolanus. We still carry that name today, worn down over the centuries into a single word, Pozzolana. They had no idea why it worked. They knew nothing of silica or alumina or the chemistry of what they were doing. They only knew by trial and long experience that this particular ash from this particular cursed ground did something no other earth could do. The architect Vitruvius wrote it all down in the age of Augustus. He described the powder found near Baiae and around Vesuvius, and he marveled that piers built with it would, in his words, set hard underwater. He did not understand the mechanism. Almost no one would for another 2,000 years. But he understood the value of it, and so did the engineers of the empire, who began to dig this volcanic ash out of the ground by the ton, load it onto ships, and carry it clear across the Mediterranean to wherever Rome needed to build something that would last. The land that would one day bury Pompeii had given Rome the material to build forever. Now clear away a mistake, because almost everyone pictures this wrongly. When we say concrete, we imagine a gray liquid, a truck with a spinning drum, a river of wet slurry pouring into a mold and leveling itself out. That is our concrete. It is not, for the most part, how the Romans worked. Roman concrete was not usually poured. It was laid. It was a stiff, dry, reluctant mixture, closer to wet earth than to soup, and it had to be put in place by hand and by muscle. Gangs of workers built it up in layers. They would spread a bed of the lime and ash mortar, then press and pack the caementa into it, the broken stones, the lumps of tuff, the shards of old brick, then another layer of mortar, another course of rubble, tamping it all down as they went. And usually they did not leave the concrete bare. They built a facing first, a skin of neat brick or small pyramid-shaped stones set in a diamond pattern the Romans loved, and used it as a permanent mold, filling the core behind it with the rough concrete that no one would ever see. What we read as a brick building is very often brick only on the surface, and a solid heart of concrete within. This sounds crude. It was anything but. Because they laid it by hand, they could control it in a way we rarely bother to. They could grade the material, choosing heavy, dense stone for the parts that had to bear crushing weight down low, and switching to light, frothy volcanic rock higher up where weight was the enemy. They were not just filling a form, they were tuning the material, layer by layer, to the load it would carry. And that hand-built layered structure would turn out to matter more than anyone guessed. To see what this material could really do, you have to follow the Romans to the place stone was never meant to go, into the sea itself. Around the year 20 before Christ, on the coast of what is now Israel, King Herod set out to build a harbor where nature had refused to put one. The shore there was open and straight, with no bay, no shelter, nothing to break the water. It should have been impossible. Herod's engineers did it anyway, and they did it with concrete. They built great wooden forms like bottomless boxes and floated them out and sank them onto the seabed. And into those forms, down through the water, they poured the pozzolana mortar, and it set. It hardened under the sea, exactly as Vitruvius said it would, growing into vast artificial reefs of stone that became the foundations of a harbor called Sebastos, one of the largest artificial ports in the entire Roman world. The ash for it was shipped in from the Bay of Naples, dug from the burning fields near Puteoli, and carried the length of the Mediterranean because only that volcanic dust would set beneath the waves. And for their sea work, the Romans did something stranger still. They mixed the material, not with fresh water, but with seawater itself, the very thing that ruins modern concrete, folded straight into the recipe. All around the empire, they did this. The harbors of Portus and Baiae, breakwaters and moles and fish tanks, whole waterfronts sunk into the Mediterranean on a foundation of volcanic gray. And 2,000 years later, when a team of scientists went out with a drilling rig to core into these drowned Roman structures, they found them still there, still solid, still holding back the same sea that had long since devoured everything modern beside them. But the greatest thing they ever built out of this material does not stand in the sea. It stands in the middle of Rome, and you can walk into it today. The Pantheon. Rebuilt under the Emperor Hadrian around the year 125, it is crowned by a dome of unreinforced concrete 43 meters across. And after 1900 years, it is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome on the face of the earth. Nothing we have built since, with all our steel, has beaten it in its own class. There is no frame inside it, no steel, no iron, no hidden skeleton. The concrete is the structure. It holds itself up by nothing but its own geometry and the strength of the material. A single curved shell of Roman concrete, thousands of tons of it hanging over your head. And they built it with breathtaking cunning. The dome is thick and heavy at its base, where the load is greatest, and it grows thinner and lighter as it rises. The Romans changed the very recipe as they climbed. Dense, heavy aggregate down low, and then, higher up, chunks of light volcanic pumice, so that the top of the dome is made of stone that could almost float. They hollowed the inner surface into sunken panels to strip out still more weight. Every part of the material is doing exactly the job that part of the dome required. At the very top, they left a hole, a round opening nearly 9 meters wide, open to the sky. The oculus, it has no glass and never has. For 19 centuries, the rain has fallen straight through it onto the marble floor, where the Romans cut drains to carry the water away. Storms have poured into that building since before the fall of the empire, and it has never come down. Stand beneath the oculus and look up, and you're standing under a 2,000-year-old ceiling of gray volcanic concrete with a hole in the middle of it, holding itself up, as it has all along, by chemistry and geometry alone. And then the people who knew how to do this simply disappeared. The fall of Rome was not one event, but a long unraveling, and the knowledge of concrete unraveled with it. It was never written in a single book that could be lost in a single fire. It lived in the hands of the men who mixed it, in the feel of the right mortar, in the knowledge of which ash from which ground was good, in the supply lines that carried pozzolana across a sea that Rome no longer controlled. When the empire came apart, all of that came apart with it. The ships stopped sailing, the great organized kilns went cold, the engineers scattered, and their apprentices had no one to teach. And within a few generations, the most advanced building material the world had ever seen was gone. Not destroyed, but forgotten, as completely as if it had never existed. For something like 1,000 years afterward, no one on earth could make it. Medieval builders, raising their cathedrals, worked in cut stone and weak, crumbling mortar that the Romans would have thrown away. Vitruvius's book survived, copied out by hand in a few monasteries, and men could read his words about the miraculous powder. But reading is not knowing. The living craft was dead, and all through those centuries the proof of what had been lost just stood there. The Pantheon never fell. The harbours never washed away. Whole generations were born and died in the shadow of Roman concrete. They could no more reproduce than fly, walking every day past a dome they had no way to build. A mystery, sitting in plain sight in the middle of the world, made of a recipe nobody living could read. When concrete finally came back, it came back different, and it came back everywhere. In the 19th century, chemists worked out a new kind of cement, a powder made by burning limestone and clay together at ferocious heat, ground fine, that would set hard and fast with nothing but water. It was cheap, it was strong, it was reliable, and it conquered the planet. Today, concrete is the most used manufactured material on Earth. We pour billions of tons of it every single year. After water, it is the substance humanity consumes more of than anything else. The modern world, every city, every road, every tower is built out of it. But our concrete is not their concrete, and ours dies. Modern concrete is enormously strong when you crush it and pitifully weak when you pull it. So to make it span and stretch and reach, we cast bars of steel inside it. Reinforced concrete. The steel carries the tension the concrete cannot, and the steel is the flaw at the heart of everything we build. Because water and salt work their way in through the tiny cracks, and they reach the steel, and the steel begins to rust, and rust swells. It expands with enormous force from the inside until it splits the concrete off in sheets and exposes itself to more water, and the whole structure begins to unmake itself from within. That is why our bridges and car parks and seawalls are rated to last 50 years or 100 and often fail long before. And there is a second bill to pay, making that cement, burning all that limestone, pours carbon dioxide into the air on a colossal scale. Something like 8% of all human emissions come from cement alone. We built the modern world out of a material that is both temporary and ruinous. And a few hundred meters offshore, the Roman version sat quietly under the sea, 2,000 years old, getting stronger, and no one could say why. Working out why became the obsession of a handful of modern scientists, and what they found rewrote the story completely. They went out to the drowned Roman harbors and drilled cores from the ancient marine concrete, and brought the gray cylinders back to the laboratory and put them under microscopes and X-ray beams to see what 2,000 years in the sea had actually done. Everyone expected damage. Salt water is poison to concrete. They expected to find a material slowly falling apart. They found the opposite. The seawater had gone soaking into the Roman concrete over the centuries, exactly as feared. But instead of tearing it down, it had fed it. The salt water reacted with the volcanic ash still hidden in the mix, dissolving it and regrowing it as new minerals. Rare, interlocking crystals with names like aluminous tobermarite and philipsite, threading through the paste and lining every pore and cavity in the stone. These crystals are the key. They grew in platy, interlocking sprays that reinforce the material from the inside and blunt any crack that tries to spread. A reinforcement not of steel, but of mineral, and one that could never rust because it was already stone. And here is the part that turns the whole thing over. The crystals were still growing. The reaction had never stopped. For 2,000 years, the Roman concrete had been slowly consuming the seawater around it and using it to build fresh crystal, healing and tightening and strengthening as the centuries passed. We design our concrete to resist the sea, and the sea beats us every time. The Romans, by genius or by luck, built a material that eats the sea and grows stronger on it. Ours begins to die the day it is poured. Theirs, in the one place that should kill it fastest, was busy coming alive. But the deepest secret was not in the harbours. It was hiding in plain sight, in almost every piece of Roman concrete ever studied, and for centuries everyone had read it as a mistake. If you cut open a lump of Roman concrete and look closely, you find it speckled through with tiny white lumps, a millimeter or two across, chalky little flecks of lime scattered all through the gray. For generations, scholars looked at these lime clasts and shook their heads. They were sloppiness, everyone assumed, a sign the Romans had mixed the lime badly or used cheap material, small proofs that even the great engineers cut corners. Then, in the year 2023, a team of scientists led from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology looked at those white specks again and asked a simple question. What if they were not a mistake at all? What if they were the point? The team argued that the Romans had made their concrete with a technique we'd overlooked, hot mixing. Instead of gently slaking their lime with water first, the way modern practice demands, the Romans threw the raw, caustic quicklime straight into the mix. Quicklime and water react violently, boiling with heat, and that furious hot reaction leaves behind exactly these little calcium-rich lumps studded through the material. The lime clasts were not carelessness. They were the fingerprint of how it was made. And they do something extraordinary. They are a reservoir of reactive lime, locked in the concrete, waiting. When a crack forms and water seeps in, the water finds the nearest white lump, dissolves it, and carries the dissolved lime into the crack, where it hardens again as fresh mineral, filling the fracture and sealing it shut before it can grow. The concrete heals its own wounds. The team proved it. They made concrete the Roman way, with the hot mixed clasts and modern concrete without them, and they cracked both and ran water through. The modern crack leaked forever. The Roman crack closed itself within weeks, and the water stopped. The Romans had built a material with its own immune system. Whether they truly understood what they had made or simply kept a recipe that worked, we still cannot say. So the obvious question is the one that stings. If their concrete was so much better than ours, self-healing, sea-proof, lasting 2,000 years, why on earth do we not just build with it now? The answer is that better depends on what you are asking the material to do. Roman concrete is patient. It is weak at first and gains its real strength slowly over years and decades and centuries as those hidden reactions grind on. That is useless to a modern project that must be finished by next spring and pass a stress test the day it opens. Our concrete is built for speed, hard and strong within a month, ready to carry a motorway at once. We traded permanence for haste, quite deliberately, and mostly without noticing we had made the trade. And there is the steel. The steel is the flaw that kills our concrete, yes, but it is also the thing that lets a bridge leap a valley and a tower stand on a needle. Roman concrete, with no steel and little tensile strength, could never make those shapes. It could pile up a dome or a wall or a sea mole magnificently forever. But it could not fly. We chose the material that flies and accepted that it dies. But now that we finally understand the old recipe, we are beginning to want it back. Laboratories around the world are building the Roman tricks into modern mixes. Hot mixed lime clasts for self-healing, volcanic ash and industrial ash in place of some of the carbon-heavy cement, concrete designed to seal their own cracks and stand for centuries instead of decades, and to poison the sky far less in the making. The recipe we let slip through our fingers 1,500 years ago is turning, slowly, into the recipe we are chasing. Go back, at the end, to that gray wall in the Bay of Naples. The empire that poured it is gone. The engineers who knew the mix are 70 generations dead. The name of the man who ordered that particular wall built is lost, and the harbor it once protected is a ruin. Everything human about it has washed away with the centuries, exactly as everything washes away. Everything except the material. Down there under the salt, in the dark, that 2,000-year-old concrete is not resting. It is working. Seawater is still seeping into it and still growing new crystal, still knitting the mass tighter, still healing every hairline crack the winter storms open. The wall is, in the only sense that matters, still being built by the sea, by chemistry, by a reaction the Romans started before the birth of Christ and never lived to see finish. Think about the strangeness of that. A people with no chemistry, no microscopes, no notion of the atom, mixing ash and burnt stone and seawater by hand, and out of it came a material that sets beneath the waves, that feeds on the ocean that should destroy it, that closes its own wounds, and that outlasts the civilization, the empire, and the very memory of the men who made it. And we, with all our machines and all our science, built our world out of something that begins to crumble in a single human lifetime and heats the whole sky to make. The Romans thought they were only building harbors and a temple to their gods. What they actually left behind, without ever knowing it, was the better version of our most important material, poured and lost and stumbled on again 2,000 years too late. The empire fell, the recipe was forgotten, but the gray stone it left in the sea is still down there right now, quietly growing harder, healing itself in the dark and outlasting everyone who ever tried to explain it. Rome is gone. The concrete is still setting,